Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2005 EUSPBA Judges Seminar. Today we're going to focus entirely on pipe band ensemble. The two leaders of our session today really don't need any introduction. They're very well known to all of us. Jack Lee and Reid Maxwell have had leadership positions with Simon Fraser University and taken that band to the very upper echelon of grade 1 in the world, one of the top very few bands at that level. Both Jack and Reid are accomplished solo contributors and are world-class and excel in that aspect as well. So without further ado, let's welcome Jack Lee and Reid Maxwell.
Thank you very much, Chuck. Thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for coming. Yeah, we appreciate the chance to be here. Reid and I do travel a lot and speak to a lot of groups about a lot of piping, drumming, and pipe band topics. But this is a good one. We are still active competitors, and we're kind of excited that judges do get occasional training. And I mean that in a nice way. We were thinking back as to what we allegedly knew about Ensemble, 5, 6 years ago, and how we feel that we know a lot more about it today. It's an interesting area because it's developing and maturing so much, as you know. The easiest way to learn about Ensemble is to be actually in building it, which is what we definitely do. In the early days of pipe bands, we might have just had our pipe corps and drum corps practicing separately and playing the occasional tune at band practice. Those days are so far gone. If that was how we ran practice today, then we would, I think, be non-competitive. It's the band first and our individual corps second. So we're excited to see that you guys are involved in upgrading, and we encourage you to, keep going forward with that. Get other people here who have a lot of knowledge in this area. Ensemble is difficult to adjudicate because it's difficult to articulate. It's not a science, it's an art, and it's one that's developing, as I said. So here is a basic description of what Ensemble may be. And we just want to put this out for discussion, and then we'll get into these areas more deeply. Let's have a look at that for a minute. So Ensemble really is the full package. It is none of the building blocks of the band can be adjudicated in isolation when you're doing Ensemble. They're building blocks for the full package. And when you are adjudicating Ensemble, it's the package. Not the pipe corps, not the drum corps, the package. However, it's difficult to ignore the individual building blocks. And we don't want you to leave thinking that you don't listen to that, because of course you do. But it starts with instruments that are in tune, an enjoyable tone throughout the band. Rich, harmonic, in pitch, the various sections in pitch with each other, pipes and drums tuned to each other and to the collective good. It's playing together from start to finish. Drum corps playing with the pipe corps. Drum corps playing well on their own. Pipe corps playing well on its own. One complementing the other. It's a midsection complementing both. The correct expression, execution. Is it well played or is it not? Is it Scottish music with phrasing and expression? Can you hear embellishments? Is there a nice tempo and lift? Is it enjoyable to hear? Are you hearing some variety? Or is it all bang, 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 rat-a-tat-tat, all the same from start to finish? Is there some dynamic in the performance? This next one, I know Reid and I have strong opinions about this, but playing compositions within the band's ability. I've talked to Ed and Kenny about this several times, but when we travel and judge, we so often hear bands in the lower grades playing the latest favorites off the world CD, something that FM or Shots might have played, or maybe SFU, and the band is just not able to play it well. So is it good ensemble? Doubtful. They may play it together with pipe corps to drum corps, but the individual building blocks may not be able to handle it. So we like to see an appropriate selection of tunes within a pipe band's ability. Precise starts, stops, breaks, defining moments. Is it put together cleanly? Those are nice, easy ones to judge, because when it's not clean, boy, you can sure hear it. Thoughtful transitions. We'll talk about this a bit later, but the whole transitioning and integration of the flow of a medley has really evolved in the last few years. It's no longer a, pull the tunes together that you enjoy playing, put them together in an order which makes sense, and calling it a medley. There's a strategy now. And so you, as a judge, you're listening for the strategy. Does it make sense, or is it a cut and paste operation? The tasteful use of harmony at times. Is there any? Does it work? Is it too much? Does it help anyone? Is it adding to the performance, or is it just, are they just putting it in because you're supposed to put some in? So has that been thought through? And the drum scores. Do they work? Do they help? Are they musical? Is it a drum band? Or is it a pipe band? I don't know. Those are a few general thoughts on what we would say comprises the word ensemble these days.
Some other things that to consider as well is that we sometimes have to judge ensemble when it's a march, display, and reel. And that makes sometimes life easier, because for no other reason, we know that after the march there's supposed to be a display and supposed to be a reel. So even if you can't figure out that that's what's going on, at least you can talk against that not going on. But there's a lot to be said about breaks on a march, display, and reel as well. Like they can be tastefully done. It's not just about playing through a march and then bang right through your display and then right through your reel. And the same when it comes to the march medley too, with the tunes that have been selected. Breaks from 3 different tunes in the same time signature can be very effective if there has been a little bit of thought put into the key that the tune is written in. If it's start with a major key, go into a minor key, and then maybe going back to major key to finish. Little things like that can sometimes have an appeal. I often run into bands who are trying to put together like a 2/4, a quick march medley, and they're trying very hard to play in different time signatures, as opposed to maybe finding a few tunes in the same time signature and just kind of staying with that. Because some tunes, as most of you all know, don't really go well. Like I'm thinking about a 3/4 march into a 6/8, and you're trying to keep that whole momentum thing going. So little things like that can grab you as well. And from an ensemble perspective, if there's a poor tune selection, whether it be because not necessarily that the tune is poor, but because the time signature change doesn't work, I think that's something that needs to be highlighted as well. I think we tend to get a little wrapped up in the medley because we think medley ensemble, but there's a lot to be said about effective ensemble in marches, just marches, and MSRs.
Okay, give us some feedback. What else belongs on the list, if anything? Any disagreements?
How about different complementary key signatures? How do you go about handling that?
Okay. Excellent question. In our own teaching and playing, we do incorporate complementary keys. Okay. For example, a major key and a minor key can be used, side by side, very, very effectively. We like to see, personally, a more major key approach to a medley, but to take it down to a minor key and bring it home with something uplifting and positive at the end. I think when that is done by bands, it's very energizing, very exciting when they bring it home on a positive key. Okay? Bands that put out a performance ending in a minor key, it's not a bad thing, but it has the potential to be depressing. So I like the variety myself, and I like to bring it home. That's a personal preference. When I'm judging, I'm very, very worried about using my personal preferences too much. So hopefully I would never knock a band for ending on a minor key. I just think as a listener, it's a better strategy to come up.
Can you give me an example of what you would consider a major key, minor key?
Okay, minor key, little cascade. Minor, major key, Howard to Linton. Something like that. Thinking bringing it up is very energizing.
Good medleys always have dramatic contrast. And, there's nothing worse than a band. I mean, it's not just playing in the same key or playing in the same tempo, but, you know, there's lots of times you listen to a medley and you just say, yeah.
Yeah, next.
Yeah.
Good point. I think that deserves to be up there. That's a very good point. We'll add it in. We certainly like that, certainly like to do it, and certainly like to listen to that.
I think it's interesting to point out that there's some of these bullets are non-subjective things, that they're things that bands definitely have to do, in-tuned instruments, playing together. But then there's others that are more subjective things, you know, what we define as being, what's a thoughtful transition, you know, and I think the lower grade bands need to, like we did that, and the EUSPBA has done, they said we're looking for these specific things for certain bands, the lower grade bands to do. But beyond that, I just think it's good to point out that there's things that bands have to do, you know, but there's a lot of subjective things that happen. Obviously, you have to do that. As a judge, you have to be subjective about some things. And you pointed out that you try to, some of those things you try to sort of not make part of your judging. I always try to focus on these things that bands have to do, like from a drumming standpoint. You need to be able to execute certain things. You need to be able to do good rolls. Sorry. Sorry. So I just like to see if there was a list ever put together, like for what ensemble judges are looking for, that there be two separate things. One is, this are things that we all agree upon as being basic things we're looking for, and then there's other things that we have to put our opinions in, or subjective ideas.
Good point.
There was some late night discussion last night at the Beaton household that seemed to address the fact that as soon as you step off the objective path, the lines start to blur about what we're judging ensemble. And if there was a way to tighten it up to the objective, and right now we're talking about effective medley construction. That's, I mean, everybody, it's sort of like, you know it when you hear it, and maybe you can start to identify it verbally, but is that really ensemble in terms of playing together? Yeah. You know, I mean, what are we judging? I mean, that's the question everybody has is, well, they played well together, but I didn't like, you're back to the subjective, I didn't like the way the tunes resolved themselves at the end. Is that an ensemble issue?
If you're asking me the question, is that an ensemble issue, my answer would be yes. In my sometimes humble opinion, ensemble is more than how well did everyone play together. It goes into the subjective. How enjoyable was the performance? How musical was the performance? Was your toe tapping? Was it giving you the right feeling? That's very subjective stuff. And as we said earlier on, this is an art form. We don't have all the answers for that, and we each deal with that stuff differently. But I do not believe that ensemble is strictly limited to how well we play together.
With the ensemble issue, there are very, very few players. In fact, there might even, I don't know if there's anybody in this room who can play pipes as competently as they can play drums. And there are only a very, very few people that I know who can play professional at drumming and can play professionally at piping. And so I think as this ensemble thing is still quite new, I mean, it's only about 30-some years old, really, I think that people are intimidated. So if I'm a drummer, I'm intimidated to put things down on the score sheet about the piping. And if I'm a piper, I'm intimidated to put things down on the score sheet about the drumming. But that's not what ensemble is about. It's about putting comments down on the score sheet about the music. If you judge ensemble, normally there's a a set of judges. There's 4 of us for the most part. There's 2 people who can take care of the real fine detail on the pipe, and they'll tell them if their Fs are sharp and all that kind of stuff. And there's a guy in the drumming who'll say that, you know, the drums are a wee bit flatter on the top than the bottom and all those kind of things. But when it comes to ensemble, I like to try and take a personal approach, that it's like listening to mainstream music, things that you like to listen to. You like to listen to it because it makes you tap your foot. And that's got nothing to do with key-specific things on the bagpipe or key-specific things on the drum. It's like a general, it's like, wow, I really quite like that, you know? And it might be, and it could be many things. It could be harmony. It could be lack of harmony. It could be the fact that the drummer stopped, you know? It's like, wow, what was that, you know? So I think in the initial stages of people judging ensemble, they've allowed themselves to be intimidated. Oh, I'm not going to put them down on the drumming in case I sound like a fool. Well, it's not, you're not asked. If the drumming lifts you because you, and if the drumming, for example, is phrased well because you can feel the whole band, you'll know if the whole band's on the beat and driving and playing together. Just like you will if they're not. You'll get that, if it's gone that way, you'll know. So you could put, if you don't want to be drumming specific or piping specific, you can just say that the 2 sections are fighting here with pulse. And if they are lifting the music together, you can write that down on the sheet. But you shouldn't be intimidated, you know? Like if you went to a jazz club and you were sitting down and the drummer was hopeless, you would tell you, that's hopeless, that guy's leaving me on the beat. Well, pipers, I think, are intimidated to come out and say that on the sheet. And drummers are intimidated sometimes to come out and say what they really think on the sheet because they don't want to get into a specific area because they don't pipe. But at the end of the day, you could still go into a specific area because it's not about that real technical aspect about how that tune's played and, you know, how the doublings and grace notes and flams and drags are played. It's about the music of it all, you know?
If you're judging grade 4, grade 5 band, you want to be able to identify the problems to help the band improve. And that's sort of one level where you have to have some specific knowledge of the nuts and bolts. When you're dealing with a grade 1 band, you're not going to make as many specific comments on individual sections of the band. The comments are going to be much more overall for the simple reason that all the nuts and bolts are there. You know, it's just a simple matter of meshing, whereas when you get a lower grade band, I mean, you can't hear the drum corps because they've got 16 tenor drummers standing in front of the 3 side drummers they've got. Well, that's a pretty nuts and bolts kind of issue that you got to tell them about so that they can improve it.
I think what you just said relates to what Tom Foote mentioned just a little bit ago, where there are certain things that you expect that in order to create ensemble, there are these things. And then you move into that area where it becomes more of a personal tasting. And I think as you, from grade 5, you probably don't even get into personal taste. You're probably staying in that, this is what the expectation level is. And then as the grades go up, it basically goes in to the other side. Marty?
It seems to me, I know personally when I try and wrap my mind around this, it seems fairly straightforward and I think we could probably, not that that's a goal for today, hammer out a list of sort of, you know, hallmark characteristics or key attributes of good ensemble. The next challenge, I think, though, is then taking it and actually defining what I mean, I think we can enumerate some of the things that go into the recipe, but then it's like trying to describe a color to someone. It seems like we have a hard time making that transition from the key ingredients or the key elements to actually applying it in some sort of consistent manner that's meaningful to not just ourselves as we talk amongst one another, but also to the competitors, so they've got a sense of what ensemble means, again, to Ed and Tom's point in grade 5, or to Reid's point in grade 5, grade 4, grade 3, and grade 2.
Very good, very well put.
In trying to describe the subjective elements of ensemble, we have to also be very careful that we don't compartmentalize it to the extent that we box ourselves in. We have to be open in terms of really listening to music. There may be new things that people are trying to do that are very, very effective. So we have to be careful that we don't try to write everything down and say, this is the list. There's going to be new things on the list.
Good point. Would you all agree that knowledge of the building blocks is key to being able to adjudicate anything in this world, particularly anything artistic like ensemble? Okay, let's move forward, and if you don't mind, and we don't want to cut you off because continue to ask questions, but here are the 4 I's, you guys. Introduction, intonation, integration, and interpretation. We kind of felt that it all fell into one of 4 categories. Okay, let's talk about introductions. What constitutes an introduction? Some of the things on this list. I'll talk about the pipes for a moment, and then Reid, of course, do the drumming. It's interesting to me how an introduction has gained such stature in piping and drumming and ensemble, but it really and truly has. Even in solo piping, it's that first tone that either impresses the judge or it doesn't. It's that first moment that the adjudicator and listener hears the pipe band that makes such an impact and gives you, the judges, all the opportunity in the world to form an opinion. So some of the things you should listen for, not an exclusive list by any means, are the poise factor up front. Are they ready? Are they squeaking and squawking? Do you hear drones and sounds and whatever between the rolls, or is it very tidy, very clean, very defined? Do the E's come in at the right time? And are the E's actually in tune? I think you'll agree that the majority of times the E's are not in tune for bands, because it's very difficult to do. An attack is very complicated from a piping point of view. And truly only the top bands can somewhat consistently have those E's in tune and on time. Very difficult. And when they start the tune, do they start the tune in time, and is it the same tempo that the drummers were playing 1 second earlier, or is it different? And those of us who hear bands a lot will probably argue that, no, it's seldom the same tempo. Sorry. It's usually a drop in tempo, because pipers are chicken. I'm a piper. You're kind of chicken to kick it. There's material there to hear. I like clean, tidy openings, gorgeous, rich sounding E, driving tempo. Doesn't need to be fast, but it just needs to be the same.
It's often the case, Jack says that the pipers are a little reluctant to get the E in and keep the tempo going, and there's a lot of cases where the drummers are too anxious. And you know, the pipe major hums the tune, and by the time they're at the second beat of the first roll, they've already increased the tempo. So you get one part of the band that's going a little bit too much one way, and then you've got the front side of the band that's been a little apprehensive, and by the time you get to the first note of the tune, we're already starting to separate. I think that the introduction is the key part, in as much that you only get one chance to create a first impression, and it can be so easily overlooked. Now, of course, within a medley or even a complete MSR, there's enough time goes by where you can win back the appreciation of a judge or the listener at large. But to make that first impression, I don't think that you could ever underestimate the importance of something like that. And you know, from a drumming standpoint, when you hear a really smooth, nice opening roll, you know that the rest of the performance is probably going to be good. Because if you can't at least do that, then there's a whole pile of things that you know are not going to be good in the rest of the performance. You know that. So if you get a really nice smooth roll at the start, you know, and some people want to crescendo their opening rolls. That's up to them, you know. I always think that with a three-pace roll, you will not win a contest by playing two perfect three-pace rolls, but you will lose every contest by not playing two three-pace rolls perfectly. So,
How much do you use a metronome for this purpose?
personally, I use a metronome probably a little bit when I'm practicing on my own. Ray, I would do that because I think sometimes there are certain parts of tunes that get you a little bit more excited than others, and I want to make sure that when the tune's getting excited that I'm not doing the same and doing that. I think that the use of a metronome is very important, but at the same time, I don't think that you should get wrapped up into it because it starts to make math out of music, and I've never been a believer in making math out of music personally. You know, I think you can sometimes tell when you're listening to someone when they play if they practice to a metronome all the time, because it just doesn't have that little edge on the musical aspect. You know.
I think it's a dangerous concept myself. I've never used a metronome in my whole life when I'm judging. I've actually only ever, I don't even own one. I've only ever used one 4 or 5 times in my whole life, ever. But when I'm judging, I have no idea what that tempo should be until I hear the tune. Even within a competition march, I couldn't tell you what the tempo is, but I know that I expect a different tempo from march to march. Donald McLean's Farewell to Oban is meant to be a slightly livelier tune. It's a little easier. The Bonnie Ann and some of the more beefy tunes, if they're played at the same tempo as that, to me it's inappropriate. It's much more congested, much more complicated, and it's going to be not that great. So I am scared away personally by
So
using
when you're
the metronome.
starting the band up, when you're humming the tune over, it's strictly from here.
Well, it's in my brother's heed. And we give him a little elbow once in a while, hey, slow down, or hey, speed up. But he's got a very good sense for, I think, what feels right.
Okay.
You know, play within a certain range, yeah?
Okay.
That's my opinion.
The use of a metronome, Ray, could be well used within bands, for example, and again, more so in the lower grades, at least to get some sense of where the general tempo is going to be. You know, if you're going to play your march at 80, well, let's have the pipers and drummers at least talk about that, because if you think that the march is going to be played at a different tempo, then when you get together, there's going to be instant discord in Ensemble, because the thought process in one room is that, well, we're going to be playing this march at 84, and then in the other room they were thinking something maybe 76 to 78. You come together, that's a huge discrepancy. So I think that it's good that they're kind of on the same page.
I've had cases where I've actually put comments on the score sheet over the pipe major, the way the pipe major calls out the commands. By the right, quick, march. Okay, and then everybody's wondering why they're having a hard time starting out.
Yeah.
I've actually gone all the way back to the commands, especially in the lower levels. Because if they don't have a smooth, consistent pace to the call out of the commands, I find it's a crapshoot as far as the tempo you're setting.
I think that's a good instructional point that's fair game to make for especially a lower grade band.
Right, and following that right along, even if the pipe major calls it out right, a lot of times in the lower grades around here anyway, the bass drummer is not anywhere close
Yeah.
to what was called, and so the band has no chance.
Firstly, when I'm judging ensemble, when the band is about to strike up to begin, I like to be in front of the band. I think it's not as impactful and not as easy to hear these things if you are at the side or certainly at the rear of the band. From an ensemble point of view, I know the drumming judges are usually at the back, but not always, but usually. I like to hear the impact. I like to hear the sequence. The start, end of the rolls, the strike, the silence, the strike, the E, and the tempo. I like to hear all those things. Personally, I've never been too shy about stating an opinion on drumming, on the impact of the drumming. Whether it was a strong, full presence, a life, nicely tuned drums. I'm making a quick assessment of that. We all do. Every one of us does that. In your head, how does it sound? How does it sound? And I try to stay away from, I definitely try to stay away from poor pointing or poor doublings in the first. measure or something. It's nothing to do with ensemble at that point for me. It's the impact, the overall impression of all these things at once. So I think as an ensemble judge, you should consider standing in the front, possibly moving with the band. I like to do that. Kind of walking it with them and feeling them getting into their music. Does that help?
I'd add to that introduction part of the performance. As a player, one of my favorite ensemble moments is when we actually turn into the circle and you can hear for the first time everything as you hoped it was going to sound. And as a judge, I also like that because you have this concept in your head about how it's going to sound when it all opens up like a flower, for lack of a better expression. Bang! It's like right there. And I like that moment. And I agree with Jack that when the band comes in, I like to kind of walk backwards and just kind of keep that same distance. And then for me, one of the most important parts of the performance is when they're in the circle. And it doesn't mean that they're actually stop marking time, because you'll get the impact of that sound as they're turning into the circle itself. And I think that's at that point when that moment happens, I've finished critiquing the introduction, and now I'm starting to get into the performance itself. And I would completely agree with Jack on keeping at the front of the band so that you have that whole thing, coming at you. In terms of like a band at the E, you can hear the drums will clearly cut through 3 or 4 ranks of pipers or a bass section in front. You'll hear that. You don't need to be any closer. If you're a piping judge, I don't think you need to be closer to the drums just so that you can make sure you've established something about what you think about the drum sound. You'll hear that when you get when you hear the drums initially on the rolls. You get an excellent opportunity to form an opinion on what you think of that sound before the pipes are even played, because the first roll there's no other sound. It's just and then the next roll, of course, it's coming in. The drones come in at the same time, so it's not quite as clear, because instantly then you're starting to listen for something else, and then you'll get that E, that little bit of silence, and then they'll start the tune. So, those are key little things, like the first roll, no interference. It's a freebie in terms of how do those drums really sound. Well, listen to the first roll because there's no interference. Yeah.
I'm a real believer that you want to listen to the band primarily from the front of the band. In fact, one of the things I noticed when Alistair Aiken was judging drumming this year at Maxwell in Montreal is he spent about 1/3 of his time at the top of the circle when he was judging drumming.
Wow.
And I thought, well, he's hearing their impact on a pipe section.
I just think you missed some of those key elements if you're not at the front at that moment.
A little comment I could make as well about the introduction and the whole thing, and this would address something that Gordy was saying about trying to keep, rather than talk about drumming related to ensemble and piping related to ensemble. An example, if you're at the front of the band listening to the ensemble as an ensemble judge, you could hear that the 3-pace roll started and finished on time, and you could put that on the sheet as part of your critique. Now, the drum, from a drumming perspective, the rolls might have been pulsed and a little lacking in smooth texture, but that's not your problem. There's a drumming judge who's probably several feet behind who will catch that. That is his responsibility. Your responsibility is catching the impact. Did they start on time that the pipe major called off, and did it start and stop? Because you're too far away. If you think about a pipe band, even a small band with maybe 8 pipers and 3 or 4 drummers and a couple of tenors, by the time they're on the start line and the drummers are at the back and you're a comfortable distance away so you can hear that, you're too far away really to critique what happened in the roll, because your ear won't catch it. There's too much other stuff going on. So you shouldn't worry about catching it. It's not your job to catch it as the ensemble judge. The drumming judge will get that, and if he didn't catch it, then he didn't catch it. But it's not your job, I don't think.
The first time I was asked to judge ensemble, when it just started, it was about 30 years ago, and it was up in Alma, Michigan, and I was talking with the late John Wilson. I said, John, how do you go about judging ensemble? Well, Rory, it's just like this. You stand behind the pipers, And if you can hear the sound of these drums coming through, then it's no use. There was method in the madness, meaning that sometimes the drum corps can be overpowering, I think is what his thought was, but I thought it was so funny. Just like to share it with you.
Maintaining the tempo, I would say that you want to maintain the, you know, like when, for example, in our band, Terry's there, band, by the right, quick march. I'm going to maintain what he's called off, and then as we're walking into the circle and getting ready to go, we sustain that same tempo. Or you could call, for me, that's slightly different in as much that you need to lock into the tempo that's been called before you even strike the drum. And then the other one is about the fact that you've been able to keep that going on the march. You know, like I think, personally, I think that from a personal standpoint, I hate marching and playing. It's the worst and most annoying part of the performance. It's the least enjoyable part of the performance. All I want to do is be standing and playing. But that walking part, you know, and I think it's often underrated by bands when they practice. You know, I see a lot of bands, they'll practice, they form a circle and they'll play from the rolls to the end of the performance in the circle. I don't get that at all, you know. I think that there's a whole different comfort zone when you're walking in, when you're playing, that you don't have to think about when you're actually, okay, you know, when I go like that, I'm happy. That walk in, terrible, especially some of the games fields that we play in too, you know, tripping on the way and that, you know, that's just a little sidebar to that. But I think that it's, for me, it's a couple of different things. You've got to maintain the tempo that's been called off and then keep that going after that. It's one thing to start together, but then you could easily separate because, you know, the drummers are getting a little more excited and they're pushing more, so they're getting ahead of the pipe, you know. I think it's all about keeping that focus on the beat that was set. But when a band gets to the competition arena, they should be, you know, that should be part of the whole practice thing that they've done, is walking in and playing.
We don't really have too much on our score sheet about the introduction, and so you have to write everything. And I'm like, a lot of times by the time I finish writing everything that I processed about this whole introduction, they're halfway through the first tune, or they're through the first tune, and then it's like the break, and I didn't really say anything much about the first tune. I would like to see us improve our, something about you can capture something more quickly.
I've always found that's a challenge. That when a band strikes up, I have all these thoughts, because all these things happen in the, you know, 3 seconds through to the end of the first part or whatever. I have all these little thoughts, and it's hard for me to get those things down in a hurry, looking like I was somewhat intelligent, and still listen to what's going on. But I know that in some way I have to get those down. What I'd like to do is make some initial comments, and if I have more to say, I'll leave a gap and come back to it at the end of the performance. So I'd like to be actively listening. Kenny?
I think on that, Jack, there's a dead space in the performance, probably one part after the introduction, where in that dead space you can start to make your comments. If you start to make comments too early, there's a chance that you're going to miss some of the initial things like tempos, pipers, drummers not getting started together, and so on. You're busy writing, you're not listening or watching, and that dead space comes halfway through the introductory tune, and you can make comments successfully there and still carry on and be ready for that second tune, knowing when it's going to come. So
good point.
Would
you agree that you need to get something down?
It's
early?
Mechanics. Even to jot a note that you can come back to, and I like your idea of coming back, and I often come back. If I got a little note that says come back, make a comment on the introduction, away you go, you know.
The only risk I find about the coming back to do it later approach, you're often in such a great hurry, and bands are coming fast and furious. For me, at the very end, that's when I make my comments on construction, flow, thought, you know, the musical expression, interpretation, all those sort of things about the package. That's when I like to do that, and you're often struggling to squeeze that into the time available. It is. You have to really haul.
The other thing as well, Ken, just to talk to that little point that you made as well, and also to substantiate again the point I was making about when the band turns and that sound hits you for the first time, I think that you do not want to be writing at that point. You want to try and make sure that that's a point where you want to be listening. So if you need to get something down, you know, for me, I can't walk backwards and write at the same time. So it's not gonna, you know what I mean? So I would wait until after that, and then I'd go. But if you feel comfortable at doing that, then you should do it. But that's one part of the performance from an ensemble perspective. I think it is absolutely critical. Your ears want to be completely focused on that band when they go into the circle, because there's a huge. That's basically when you get the first impression on whether there's going to be balance. As the drum's too loud, or the drum's too quiet, is the bass drum too loud, is the, you know, because normally when a bass drum's walking in straight, and I know some of them like to walk in not straight, so because they think that that's going to be better, but I prefer when the bass drum's straight, because I like the magic of that moment when it turns and it just fills the whole band, you know. So I think that that's really an important part of the performance, and you should not be writing at that point. You should be waiting for it. And the bands that have that, like, wow, listen to that. Because at that moment in time, you're really getting to hear the bass section, the drums behind the bass section, and the circle format, and the pipes, you know. And I think that that's just a key performance, a part of the performance that you shouldn't miss.
Second die. Intonation, tone for short. When I'm judging ensemble or piping, we'll talk mostly about ensemble today, I have a lot of things in my mind when I'm trying to do this. I'll tell you what my piping thoughts are. Firstly, there's different levels of tuning. There are most definitely different levels. There is the poorly tuned bagpipe, which you will hear many, many times in the lower grades, which is essentially discord on every note, or many notes. And as the quality of the tuning improves, there can be the sweetness of the bagpipe. Specifically, whether you have a chord when C and E are played, whether you have some sweetness on the F, some critical things, and those are very hard to achieve. And then there can be the final level is the sort of richness of the bagpipe. Is it harmonic and enjoyable? So for me, those are different levels of tuning as the grades go up. And then there's the aspect of time. For example, you make this quick assessment in your mind when you're hearing the opening notes as to the quality of tuning. For me, I always try to listen to the quality of tone. I'm still talking about the pipe corps now, as the medley proceeds. Most bands have a slight deterioration in tone as the medley proceeds, as the performance proceeds. It's just the way it happens. Was the band able to sustain a tone? An excellent place to hear that in a medley competition is the slow air, because it's often just a moment of quiet without the drums playing. You can actually really again hear the quality of the tone, and often the slow air in a medley is somewhere in the midpoint. I look forward to that. I look forward to the opening notes of the slow air, because often there's no harmony. It's just pure piping. So you get a few seconds of clarity, and the harmony comes back in. You hear, if things are in tune, if you have chords. And I like to listen towards the end. So those are my piping, generally my piping ensemble-based adjudication strategies. Another thing for me is the drones. I try to be very careful with my assessment of the drones until they have formed a circle, and I like to most definitely hear around the band for tone. Are the drones in tune? There's different levels of in tune. Are they truly in tune with low A? Is the bass confident enough? Is the bass clear? Can you hear a bass quality to the tone? Are the drones enriched? Are they actually enjoyable? Or are they highly synthetic, very, very buzzy? So I try to adjudicate that kind of stuff by moving around the band and actually listening for those points. So let me turn it over to Reid, and we'll talk in a minute about the overall tone.
as a drummer, I wouldn't begin to focus on the detail of the pipe sound that Jack could as a piper when judging ensemble. But a couple of the things that I would look for example, in the slow air part of performance is I would first of all try to latch instantly onto the melody line and grasp the melody line of the performance. And I would hope at that particular time when the transition's made to the beginning of the slow air that there would be no harmony, so that I actually get an opportunity to see if I do like the melody and grasp the melody line. And then towards the latter stages, if there's a little harmony sprinkled in, then that's fine. But that's the kind of thing that I would look for as an ensemble judge. Being a drummer who I don't have that trained ear to pick up certain things on the pipe. And again, I relate to the fact that there's two piping judges who will be all over that if there's good or not so good things to say. But I'm kind of listening, okay, I get this. And it might be, even if it's a tune that I'm not familiar with, then I really want to make sure that I can feel that there's a melody line there, you know? And after I've established that, then if there's a little sprinkling of harmony, that's fine. And as a drummer, I like to hear the fact that there is no drumming, at least in the initial impact of the slow air. In that first kind of line, just kind of it's kind of that moment where I'm waiting to see what I think of that sort of sound without the drums there, because right from the get-go, with the 2/3 bass rolls, there's been nothing but drums there. So I'm looking for that moment where they don't play. And then when they do come in, how they decide to come in and sort of work with a melody line as well. But I think for me, it's important to latch onto that melody line. Yeah. And having confidence that the rest of the panel that you're working with, they'll do their job. Don't worry about that, you know? And if something's happening away on the other side of the circle, well, there's plenty of bodies going around. They should be able to catch stuff like that going on.
Another thing that when I'm judging ensemble, strive to listen for is the overall quality of the intonation. Specifically, do the side drums fit tonally with the pipes, and does the midsection fit? Is it in tune? Okay, this is becoming more and more of an issue as midsections are becoming bigger and more elaborate and more finely tuned. I know that the amount of attention we give to tuning our midsection is crazy compared to what it used to be. It's really an issue, and we really do tune those drums individually. I do not have the trained ear as a side drummer, definitely, but I have an opinion. And I like to hear a match. For example, if the pipes are quite high in pitch, I like to hear a match from the side drums. I don't like to hear the flat, dullish sort of side tone. I think there's a mismatch there if the pipes are very high. So I try to listen for that. I most definitely try to listen to the bass drum. Is the bass drum in tune, or is it just being played? I don't mind saying it's difficult for me to hear that. It's deep. There's a lot of side noise going on, and I have a hard time hearing it. But what I have tried to do is to position myself in a spot in the band outside the circle where I can hear that. Okay? And I find if I'm right behind the side core, you can hear the bass, but it's quite loud, but there's a lot of distortion with the sides. I find for me, if I can get in the corner, I can hear the pipe tone, I can hear the side tone, and I can hear the midsection from a corner point, sort of between the last piper and the start of the side core. For me, that's a good place I can hear that stuff. And I try to spend a few moments in these corners listening for the tuning of the midsection. So I encourage you guys as ensemble judges to do something like that which fits for you. You need to find a way to evaluate the overall tone of the band. Kenny?
A midsection will never win a contest for you, but it'll sure lose a contest for you. And secondly, going around the practice sessions at the Worlds this year and listening to mostly grade 1 bands and then applying what I heard to lesser grade bands, I was finding that too many midsections were not, now that we're using multi-tones in the midsection, we're getting almost to the point where it's a semi-melodic instrument trying to complement the exact tune that they're playing to, and the scores aren't written for the tenor drums that will complement the music. And so quite often in certain pieces, there's a discord between tenor and pipes. Simple reason being, what they're playing is rhythmically quite good, but tonally, it's out to lunch with the tune that they're playing. It might be, as you say, a major or a minor, and the drum isn't tuned. And I heard this in so many grade 1 bands, and then I started applying that to judging some of the other grades, and it was dominant in the other grades. The tuning of the instrument itself was not in sync with the pipes at all.
Now, on the opposite side of what you've said, when you're talking about how the importance of the tone in relation to the sound of the band, one of the things for me that annoys me from a drumming perspective, and it annoys me even more when I do ensemble, is when the bass drummer is playing beats that fall on the offbeat, where there's no melody there's no note in the melody on the offbeat, hum-ba-dee-da, and the bass drummer's playing hum-ba-dee-da. It's like, what is that? That's not ensemble at all. So that kind of thing really annoys me, and that's something that can be very simply and easily taken care of at the lowest level. Just put a roll in to fill the space in the same time that the pipe is, but you get these bass drummers and tenor drummers at the same time where they think that it's all about playing the 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, and the melody of the tune has no offbeat, you know?
You got this tenor drummers overplaying the bass, and you got two different sounds coming out. The bass and the tenors aren't in harmonic balance. And so you hear this all the time, and it gets dominant in some of the lower grades where you've got this, almost what we call a tom-tom effect, perhaps, but the instruments aren't in tune themselves. And so, you know, what are you going to say?
Well, that's a very good point. For me, there's a priority list, okay? And not every criteria is created equal. For me, as an ensemble judge, there must be a power and a harmonic in the overall sound, of which that is as an element. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I would note it and I would put it in my decision-making process, but unless all other big things were created equal, it would seldom be the defining decision point for me. There's usually enough other stuff of a big, really big nature, discord everywhere, bad pipe tone or whatever, drums that are way out from the pipes or whatever, which are, I think, slightly larger. So I try to put those down and use them as criteria, but maybe not the big one, you know? That's for me.
That point I was also making, Ken, probably comes more into the, it's not really a tonal thing, it's more playing together, and I've got a couple of other comments I'll make about that when Jack throws up the next sheet, that specifically relate to not playing to the tune, like the melody of the tune, you know? I think that's like so important, you know, like you need to understand the melody. Ray?
When you tune or when the tenor drummers tune their drums, what specific notes do they use to tune them to? And let me get to another point, because so often what I hear, many of them, they usually tune to, say, like a C or an E. You know, they're basically the two notes that they're using, right? And then you get into a tune as the likes of the 10th HLI or something like that. And this particular tune is written in D. Well, now you've got the C and E conflicting with the D and F. Now, have you any thoughts on that at all?
I think that in a case like that, most bands are probably going with more drummers or more tenor drummers, and you should focus on the drums that are suited to that key to play. The other ones shouldn't play. They should become part of the sort of visual part of the performance. I don't tune our bass and tenor drums. Stuart Little, who's a piano tuner to trade and a fine piper, he does all that for me. He's really quite good, you know. So that's a nice sort of luxury that we have. But there are other people who can do it when Stuart's not there. But it's nice to have that fine ear. And he has ideas that he shares with us in terms of what he thinks is best for the sound of the band. And for example, I like the bass drum to be slightly flatter than the bass drone, so that at all times there's that sort of foundation of sound that the bass drum is the lowest note in the band. Because if you think about your average size bass drummer, the bass drum's up here. When you strike that drum and it's the tone, if it's well set, when it tries to come through the pipes section, it's probably going to be lost because there'll be that matching of sounds and one will be lost in the other. So I like it to be slightly lower, just a little bit, so that you can, when you stand back, you can hear that it's slightly lower than the A, you know?
When you're putting your melodies together then, do you specifically choose which tenor drum you're using at different points in that particular medley?
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it's, you know, it's kind of like the inside joke where you might have a tune where there's one guy pretty much doesn't do a thing in the entire tune, and it's like, there's a lot of that going on, you know? And there's, you know, within a performance, I wouldn't have one of the tenor drummers sort of stand, they wouldn't be standing doing nothing. And to the outside listener, you wouldn't necessarily know sometimes, because sometimes I might have them ghost notes where it looks like they're all playing, but there's only one person hitting, that kind of thing. So it becomes part of the performance. It's kind of like the triangle part in the orchestra. You know, you're sitting there waiting on your part to go ding, you know. But the hitting that at the right time is so important because it really adds to the performance. I think it was maybe Ed that made the comment about 3 side drummers and 16 tenor drums. But you do get some bands, and that would be, for me, that would be an imbalance in ensemble, because all those tenor drummers, there's too many, you know. And I don't think that there's absolute hard numbers that there has to be, but I think that there has to be guidelines with drummers in general. Like, you know, if you've got 7 side drummers, let's say, or 6 side drummers, you could probably easily handle 3 or 4 tenors. Could you handle 5? I don't know. You know, I'd be having a really good listen over the winter months if it was my band, if we had only 6 sides and we decided we were going to play with 5 tenors. So in the lower grade bands, you know, if they've only got 4 sides, they should. 3 is about the max that you would ever want to go there, I think, and maybe 2 is better. So you have to make some slight sacrifices along the way until you get, it's just like side drum. I mean, you can't play with 8 side drums and 9 pipers. You just can't do that. You know, and the old, well, we'll get them to play quieter this week. That doesn't work because they get out there, they get excited, and the next thing you know, you can't hear the pipe section. Lisa?
I think part of the problem is with grade 4 and grade 5 bands, they're trying this, and they're not sophisticated enough to realize that there are times in the music that certain tenors shouldn't be playing. They think that more is better. So if we have the tenors playing all this stuff, going over notes that they really shouldn't be playing on, they're not sophisticated enough to understand it. And I think that's a big problem.
I was saying that if you want to be the lead trumpet player in the big band, don't bring a tuba to the rehearsal. You understand what that means?
No, what the heck are you talking about?
I think that sometimes, and as we're all sort of recognizing the fact that the midsection, the bass section, call it what you like, but the people who don't play snare drums but play drums in the pipe band, let's just call them that, I think that some of them are there. They want to be more important than the role really needs them to be, and they get carried away. And I think that we need to be all over that, because that's why if you want to play lead trumpet, then be the lead trumpet player. But don't bring a tuba and tell me that you want to be the lead trumpet player, because you're not going to get to do all that stuff on the tuba. Okay? So.
And this idiom is the only part that's really changing constantly right now, this midsection, bass, tenor, and whole bit. But from what I understand it, most recently, there's sort of 2 thoughts. One is a tonal thought of actually pitching the drums, and then there's also an atonal rhythmic play. And we just need to be aware of both of those things that can happen, because the lower grade bands basically are not understanding that tonal quality, but they may have a rhythmic idea. They understand the rhythm portion, you know, if their tenor drummers are former side drummers or aspiring side drummers. But the upper grades definitely have the tonal idea, obviously, you know, like yourselves and other grade, you know, the upper grade bands. So, you know, when we're looking at them, whether it's from a drumming judge standpoint or ensemble judge standpoint, that we look at both those areas, and not just what's the quality of tone coming out of it, but the atonal qualities. So it doesn't you can have a nice midsection, even in the upper grades, that's not really pitched like to a particular note. It can be a blend of sound, as long as those blends make sense. It doesn't have to be to A or E, or it can be off tones.
And that's what Ed's saying, where you have these bands in the lower grades, they don't understand that there's more to it than that. You know, it's like the pipe major says, oh, there's this great tune that the field marshal played at the Worlds last year, we've got to get it. And then, of course, you get someone who's setting the bass section up in the band, and they're saying, oh, yeah, and they were doing all this stuff, so they go and try and do that, not realizing that there's way more to the whole process of the finished product than just strikes you on the CD, you know?
I think I would summarize it as follows. Your job is to judge the contest. You do not need to be an expert on every aspect of what you hear. You cannot be the expert on every aspect. But you have to have a working knowledge of every aspect. And you have to be able to prioritize these and document something on the sheet which is intelligible. As a performer, there's nothing, well, there's probably something worse, but not much worse than getting a sheet which is good, good, very good, 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 fourth prize. To me, that's a sheet from a judge who was way over his head. If I ever get to the point where I can't tell the difference, I'm not going to judge. I'm not going to do it, because I don't want to write a sheet like that. What I try to do is, for at least every band that doesn't get first prize, there's some stuff on that sheet of a helpful nature, hopefully with a smile on my face while I'm writing it. I'm not being grumpy. I'm just spelling out the things that occur to me. So I would encourage you to get comfortable with this newly developing area, be able to articulate and prioritize what is important, and document something on the sheet if it's important, if it's been an issue for you. At the same time, don't forget the big things. Don't kill a band for tenor discord if they have extremely positive tone elsewhere. The next I. Integration. Now, we could probably talk about this for a while. I don't know. Why don't I start and tell you some of my thoughts on that. When I'm judging ensemble, again, we're obviously talking about judging ensemble. It's not, for me, just listening to the accuracy of the finger work in the pipe corps. That is only one little building block to the judging of ensemble. I truly try to listen to how well the various sections are playing together with each other. And the other side of my brain is trying to listen to how well they're playing amongst themselves. Are they working together? Is it tight? At all moments in the performance, from the start right through to the finish. Is it tight? Is the side corps complementary? Is it working? Is it fitting? Is the bass and tenor complementary to the sides and to the pipes? Is it all fitting? I would say in virtually every performance I've ever heard, there are issues here that you can hang your hat on. There are things that don't work, don't fit. If I'm really desperate, if I can't find something, well, you know my idea on that, I won't be out there. But I'll at least hear something in a pipe corps that doesn't fit. Unless it's the very top bands, where it's so well rehearsed and thought out with such talented people, et cetera, that everything seems to work. So I like the overall stuff to be very tight. The starts, all the key defining moments, the breaks. I like to get my head down to the little stuff if I have a chance to hear it, and I try to hear it. The embellishments, the stuff at the next level. But to me, some of those things are of lesser importance when you're judging ensemble. I try to let the piping judge deal with the details, you know. But I'm, at the same time as I'm listening to the big things, I try to be somewhat attentive to the other things.
When it comes to the pipes and drums playing together, I guess Alistair was talking about, I had a question just before we had our break. A couple of things that for me are really important as far as ensemble goes. And for example, and even in the lower grade bands, grade 5, if you're a grade 5 band and you come to the line and you're playing a mass band score, you are not getting a prize. You are not getting a prize if you're playing a mass band score. Mass band scores don't fit anything, period. They do not fit. They give an opportunity for people to come together and play en masse at a mass bands, but they do not fit any tune, period. I'm well versed in 6/8 marches, and I do not know a 6/8 march that the 3rd and 4th bar or the 7th and 8th bar fits. I have not found one yet. So maybe I'll write one myself so that we can play that particular score. So if you're in a grade 5 band, you come up this start line and what you're playing is, you know, the standard mass bands scores that's been thrown out by your association, you're definitely not in the prize list. Because you can play things of equal degree of difficulty that could be scored perfectly to the tune. So why don't you do it? One of my big pet peeves is, why is it that little grade 5 pipe sections know 20 tunes and the drummers know 4 scores? What is that all about? You know? So I have a real problem with that. I have a problem with that in solos as well. If somebody comes up and plays a mass band score, it's just, you know, put down some comments on what they're doing and try and help them along and suggest to them that they get a score. But if you come up and play a mass band score, from an ensemble perspective, there's not one, well, there's a few notes that will fit that melody line, but that's it. Most of them are missing it. And you pipers, you know the mass band scores because you've been around them all your life. So if you hear somebody coming up and playing, you could say that this score has a mass set. This mass setting doesn't fit anything here. You know, the music needs something. Other things that really annoy me, as I mentioned earlier, and it's more about the whole integration of music, is when most 2/4 marches, for example, finish on 8th note, 8th note, 8th note, or quarter note, quarter note. Hari hum patara hum patram bra would be one, and the other ones would be like a Highland wedding would finish. Okay. Now, what drives me nuts is when someone comes up and they're playing the likes of a Brigadier Chief, let's say, or a Lord Alexander Kennedy, where the phrase finishes bram bra, and the drummers are playing tup per up. Where did tup per up go to bram bra? You know, and I hear that a lot. So for me, that's a moment that just doesn't fit. The pipers are doing something, and the drummers who have been asked to complement are not even on the same page. They're not. It's like somebody'd got one setting of the tune, the drummers got another setting, they went away and made their beatings, and the pipers worked on that, and then they got together, and there's a complete, and then on top of that, the bass drummer's playing hara hum patara hum patram ba. And then, of course, you've got 3 tenors who want their little part on the show, so they're doing the same. And it gets out of control. It builds and builds and builds, and you hear that, as opposed to going ha hari hum patara hum patre. It's easy, you know. And you'll get that because all the notes line up at exactly the same time. To me, that's kind of like simple. It's like, you know. And I guess it would, if you're arranging music for an orchestra or something like that, you would probably see it on a sheet of paper because all the notes would line up down the page as well as going along the page and making sense melodically. But that kind of stuff really, really annoys my ear. It's like I instantly clue into that. And as pipers, you would know if there's coming out against, you know, you would hear that. You would hear that. And there's a lot of that goes on. And I'm always dumbfounded when I hear that, you know, because if somebody comes out and plays against, and it's a 6-parted march, well, they've made 12 huge mistakes, and they haven't even reached the suspect, you know? Yeah. So, for me, that's a huge key thing, and those things come up lots in music, like in our marches and suspects and reels. You can hear that stuff all the time, where there's not playing, they're adding stuff in that doesn't even belong there. And I think the drummers need to be more understanding of how the melody goes completely and play to that, and the bass and tenor drummers need to be completely supportive of the side drums when they put it all together to the pipe section.
I'll tell you a couple things that I listen for and do potentially annoy me is a hyperactive drum corps. Okay, at times when it shouldn't be hyperactive. A lot of beautiful tunes that you hear are very open and flowing. The tune that comes to mind is the Kilworth Hills. That is a great tune because it's got these beautiful, rich notes. To me, it spoils the tune like that when a drum corps goes berserk with hyperactive playing. I think that's not a fit. I can't comment on the accuracy of their playing very confidently, but I would comment on the fit. To me, that's not a fit if they were hyperactive. And the reverse would be true. The reverse is less commonly heard, where the pipers are very busy and the drummers are taking a bit of a break. That's less commonly heard, but to me, that's equally not a fit. And I'll get to you in a sec. Another thing I listen for is in the last, I don't know, 10 years, there's been a great rush towards these round tunes. Great rush. The gone seem to be the days of starting with a 6/8 march or a pointed 2/4 march. Bands are essentially starting round and finishing round. And there's not a lot of pointing to be heard, except for if you take out the Strass bass in a medley. Most times you're not hearing any pointing. Everything's essentially round, which is, maybe we'll probably come to this when we get to interpretation. I have an opinion about that. But if it's going to be round, I like to hear a fit. You so often hear different degrees of roundness or different degrees of pointing. The drummers may be playing something more rhythmic, more pointed than the pipers who are attempting to achieve very round playing. Or in jig playing, where it's just the next thing to dead round, but not quite dead round. Jigs have this little little sense of emphasis on the starts of these threes, groups of threes. I like to hear that in the drumming when I'm hearing a band. And so many times you hear, I think, just a little bit of a disconnect. As Reid was talking, drummers are off writing whatever and come back with something that just doesn't fit the way the pipers have played. So I'm calling a non-fit when you have these different styles from the chorus coming out. So I encourage you to listen for that.
I've got one, actually. Reid can maybe help me on this. How are the drummers working? A pointed reel pulse is based on the upbeat of the reel. The pulse that's developed in most reels, pointed reels. You know, if you listen, it's the upbeat that is sort of delayed. I find an awful lot of drum sections have a very difficult time. They have a tendency to play the upbeat pretty flat. Taking away the pulse, the pipe section is trying to put in a real pulse, a pulsed reel, heavily pointed reel. How do you address that? How do you try to address that? Is it just strictly your ear? You know that because you assist the pulse on a pointed reel. I know you do.
Well, I think there are things that you want to do. If emphasizing the downbeat is really important, then you need to make sure that you do that and don't let things before it like that. Like for me, I would be definitely driving the beat there, and if there was a little less in that particular phrase on the offbeat, I would be quite happy to see that happen, only because, and then, you know, then might do a little bit more on offbeat. So I'd be trying to drive the beat to establish the fact that I'm in tempo, and then from there I would pick my spots where it could be, you know, better done. I think that would vary greatly in every tune, you know, and then in tunes where the emphasis is clearly on the offbeat, don't bring out the downbeat, bring out the offbeat. There's nothing wrong with bringing out the offbeat, you know. So I think that sometimes we allow ourselves to use Gordy Peters' expression earlier, compartmentized into thinking about little things like that, you know, like the strathspey should be heavy, weak, medium, weak, when there are clearly as many strathspeys that don't fit that, you know. Susan MacLeod, the third part, there's no heavy, weak, medium, weak in the third part of Susan MacLeod. And so if a drum corps is going out and they're driving the beat in that thing, you should say, hey, you're driving the beat really well there. Don't say, you know, too many triplet, you know, like, it's like criticizing a drum corps for being too triplet-like in the Caledonian Society of London. Hello, there's more triplets in the Caledonian Society of London than probably any other strathspey in the world, you know? So there are parts where you got to do that, and you need to be all over that, and you need to understand that. And if you don't, you should ask pipers who know that stuff, and they'll tell you. You know, and some of it should be kind of straightforward. I would think. You know, you would hear that, but pick your spots. The beat is more important than the offbeat, generally speaking. In terms of what Jack was saying about, you know, drummers who are overloading the bar, Alec Duffett used to call it shoveling coal. You know, trying to get more coal on the fire than it could take. And there are parts in scores where you'll be able to get your little bit in, you know, but don't do it in the primary phrases of the tune. Use it in the secondary phrases of the tune. There's a little bit more space. There's a little more license to get away with that, poetic license if you want to call it that, but not like right up front, like Kilworth Hills, bum, plop, like just drive the whole melody line there, and that would, to me, would be great ensemble. Anything busier than that, I don't think it's ensemble at all.
You're judging ensemble or even judging piping or drumming, and there's a certain aspect of the band, like a dominant bass or an out-of-tune bass, that starts to color your opinion, and you overlook it or shun it earlier on, but by the time the performance is halfway through, it's starting to dominate your thought, and by the end, it has completely taken over your thoughts, and the band is out of your list simply because of what started as a minor fault becomes absolutely major. And I don't know how to overcome that. And the bass drum is probably the most obvious one that comes to mind, but tenors as well in rhythms that don't fit, and especially in some of the lower grade bands. And I don't know how you feel towards that, Jack, but it happens to us.
I can be very easily distracted. One of my pet peeves is tenors who are going ballistic and imitating helicopters, okay? And you're threatening to take off, elevate during the performance. To me, I think tenor drum is a complementary instrument. It's not the primary instrument in a pipe band, and it distracts me, it bothers me.
Also, when something is good, and I'll cite an example because the lead drummer's in the room right now, Scott Armour's drum corps. I was judging drumming at Aldermont a couple years ago, and I was judging piping, but I was listening to the drum corps throughout the whole performance. I don't know what I scored in the piping, I'll be honest with you, because the percussion was so good, so it works both ways, you know.
In the end, it's a pipe band, and it has to fit. It has to be complementary and enjoyable in the overall. It's I hear your point. It's very hard to ignore a very strong back end. I mean, it's so enjoyable. Get your foot tapping. You know, it's great.
One of the comments up here, the third one on defining moments, is like tasteful use of bridging. For me, I think that in a medley performance, there needs to be more than just clean breaks from one time signature to the next. I think that we need to look at, you know, bending and twisting things around to kind of paint the picture. And I think a really good medley, for example, should tell a story. It should start, and it should have a sort of theme that goes all the way through it, and it comes to some sort of conclusion, as opposed to just having a bunch of tunes all put together, you know. And a march sustain reel, it's a little different. It's a good march, nice break, finish. It's a little easier in terms of you're not expecting anything different. And I think the idiom is probably going to hold that up over at least in my competitive time anyway, that march sustain reels will just be played in the traditional march sustain reel format. I would hate to see that change. But when it comes to medley construction, and even quick march medley, you could do something slightly interesting. You don't have to just play to the last note of the tune and then start the next tune. You could, you know, carefully do that with some guidance, you know. You could make things just slightly more interesting where it cut, that was kind of neat, you know, and you get the judge and or the listener on your side, and that's a good thing to do.
Just on the topic of bridging, I just want to show you one of the changes that's been occurring. In a medley, we're in medleys here. You go from a march to a strathspey. Bridging is a tool. That's all it is. It's a tool to help integrate a performance. It's a way to make things fit, make things make sense. Reid's comment about, you know, bridging is, at one point didn't exist, and you would finish one tune and start another. In the early days of bridging, between a march and a strathspey, let's say between the first and second tune, you would have, early days of bridging, something in there. And it would always be tenor and bass. Boom. Something very simple, kind of cool, kind of interesting. Man, those days are gone. Now bridging has gone absolutely berserk. And what you tend to see is one of two things. The last chunk in here, the last chunk of the first tune, or the end of the first tune, you can hear all kinds of potentially interesting things happen. One of the common ones is a change of time signature, going from strathspey, or pardon me, march into something else, you know, a new tune with the same kind of notes. Or you can hear the build-up in here, okay, where the band will potentially not start that tune in a traditional way. They'll work their way into it. Good example, maybe I should make this a jig, sorry. Good example on my mind was really the nice way Field Marshal did it a few years ago when they went into, what's this tune called? Dum da 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 dee, dum da 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 dee do do dum da da da. Archie Begg. They did a whole build-up. Dum da 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 dee, da 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 dee, dum da 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 da. Really clever. And that was really good to hear because everybody was on the same page there. The tenors seemed to know when to not play. The pipers were harmonized and the sides were tastefully converting into that tune. I thought, oh, that's so good. And you hear some of this. We do a lot of this ourselves. We will convert out, change the key, change the time signature or whatever, and work our way in. My point is, well, I guess I have 2 points. I don't like to see that stuff overdone. I know we're getting into interpretation here, but I think it spoils the effect of anything if you do it too many times. So for me, I like to hear a good bridge, well done, maybe once in a performance. Not 5 times, maybe once, maybe twice if it's really going well. But within here, we do spend a lot of time making sure everyone's on the same page. And Reid and Terry work this to death, making sure that the tenors and the sides are all doing the same thing at the same time. You will often hear chaos here. As a judge, just pointing out, you should listen to those breaks. Listen to both sides of those bridges, because more times than not you'll hear chaos here or a mess here. Pipers won't start with the drummers at the same time. These days were very simple. We didn't have to do anything except basically play low way while the tenors played a little bit of rhythm. Okay, so that's bridging. I don't know where it's going from here, but it's getting more and more interesting. Sometimes the length of this is getting a little bit carried away. Taken forever to bridge. I think that spoils the impact of a bridge as well.
I mean, listening to the Worlds this year, the Grade 1 bands are all doing some absolutely fantastic bridges. And is this the same sort of caveat you'd give to the lower grade bands? You know, just because they're doing it doesn't mean you can do it.
And that's the sort of thing I think, you know, I'd almost cringe if I heard a grade 4 band come out and trying something like this.
So I totally agree with that. In our junior bands back home, we basically don't bridge. A little bit.
They'll do a little bit of stuff, but the grade 4 kids,
Very simple.
just kind of, we're happy to have them play tunes well. You know, there'll be time to do that. It's like, you know, the RSPBA, for example, have just handed out a list of tunes that you now have to pick your tunes from. And sometimes things like this have to be done because pipe majors of grade 5 and 4 bands are out of control. And sometimes you need to implement things to bring them under control. You know, a few years ago when we had a very young crop of kids that were playing in our grade 4 band, I was surprised that they were winning every week because, you know, there were some real young kids in there, and it's like, God. So I happened to be at the last games of the season before I even sort of went and sort of watched what was going on, and I sort of sat and watched most of the grade 4 contest and was trying to figure out how all the kids' bands were dominating. The kids were not winning. The adult bands were losing. They were awful. They were their own worst enemies. It was incredible. And all the bands that were being guided by other people, adults, you know, people maybe from grade 1 and 2 bands, they were playing what they were told, and they were doing it well. And the other bands were bands that you knew were not getting any help, and they were out of control, completely out of control. And it still goes on in the grade 4, and that's why I think the RSPBA have finally said, no, we're not going to have any of this, you know. We're going to have you play some of these tunes and at least try to get some control over it, because the leaders of those bands are, you know, they're fit to be tied. They're just completely out in left field.